أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to episode 7 of our Eschatology podcast. And what I want to look at today, inshallah, is the intellect and its relation to signs and symbols. Now, a symbol is inherently a representative between what it represents and the representation's meaning. So the symbol itself does not contain the meaning, and it does not also contain what it represents. It is indicative of a thing, and on the other side it is indicative of what that thing means. So it acts as an intermediary between the formal and structural world, which is what we call alam al-shahada or alam al-mulk, and the shapeless, immaterial, essential world, which is what we would call the alam al-malakut or alam al-amr. Now, the intellect's prime attribute in this case is in having access to these three realms, which is the realm of the symbols, alam al-mithal, and then the alam al-shahada, and then the alam al-amr. So it has access to the symbols, it has access to the objects that are associated to those symbols, and then it has access to what those symbols mean. Whether these symbols are physical in nature, such as letters in language or shapes and forms, or they are metaphysical, such as what is seen in dreams and visions when somebody is asleep. So the intellect's learning now in this case is done through the knowing of symbols and their proper associations. So knowing what a symbol is, and then what does it represent, what does it mean, and then what is its proper, or how to properly associate the symbol to the thing that it represents, and then to the meaning of that thing. So what the intellect does at all times is to seek out symbols and to associate them to meanings. And it does this perpetually, whether the being is conscious of it or not, whether you know that you're doing this or you don't know, you're not aware. Your intellect is doing this at all times without any form of restriction. And this is why having certain boundaries or parameters and limits is essential to keeping the intellect from straying off course, because if the intellect goes off course, then the being will also end up going off the track. Now, it's important to understand on this that the brain and the intellect are not the same thing. The brain is ad-dimagh, that's its term, and then the intellect is al-aql, and that's its term. The brain is basically an instrument that is used by the intellect to seek out the formal aspects of this material realm, because the intellect is an immaterial entity. It doesn't have any material form or any physical structure. It is a spiritual entity, and so it is not part of this physical world, but the brain is part of this physical world. And so through the soul, which is embodied into the physical body, the intellect is given access to the brain, and so it uses the brain to seek out aspects of this material realm to which it can then associate all the symbols that it knows and what those symbols mean. And it achieves this through the senses. So the senses gather information from the external world of matter in the form of light, sound, scent, like smell, and taste, and then sensation, among other tertiary forms. These are what they usually call the primary senses. Then there are other tertiary sensations or senses as well. All this information is collected by the brain, and then it is categorized into various groups: visual, auditory, and so on and so forth. The intellect then has access to this categorized information, and with its knowledge of symbols, it is able to associate the different bits of information to what those symbols mean. And so if it doesn't know a symbol, or it is unable to, or it knows the symbol but doesn't know what it means, then the intellect is not able to interpret the information, or it may only be able to interpret it partially, which means that the being may not have a complete understanding because they don't have a complete knowledge of the symbols that are required to interpret that information. It is similar to a language that a person does not know. So you may have a piece of paper in a foreign language and it's got all these symbols on it, and this is information that your senses are picking up. They are seeing the symbols, and they're seeing the contrast between black and white, and all this visual information is gathered and collected in the brain, and the intellect has access to it, but the intellect does not know what those symbols are and what those symbols mean. So until the intellect is given the chance to learn that language, to learn what those symbols are, how to identify them, whether by sight or by sound, and then what they mean, then and only then will it be able to interpret the information that is provided to it. Now, there are 4 levels of intelligence which are hierarchical, and hence, though we may be looking at the same symbols, we all have various levels of their understandings. Each of these levels has its own understandings, or rather unveilings. The first of this is what we would call agent intelligence, and this is common to everyone. It is the intelligence that functions on a rudimentary form of logic and rationality. So it works by the logic of this world in a causal-effectual relationship. And through this, the knowledge of science or scientia can be acquired by observing reality and then gathering empirical experience and empirical proofs and evidence. This is the intellect that always requires tangible proof to function. If it doesn't have tangible proof by which it can ascertain the meanings that it knows of those symbols, then it may end up negating or rejecting all that information that it has gathered. This is the intellect that requires tangible proof to function, and its power is dependent on scientific knowledge that is structured and defined, knowledge that has a certain tangibility to it, has a certain palpability to it, and has got proofs that are replicable, or rather experiments that are replicable, meaning you can do a trial and error and replicate the results that are derived from this kind of understanding or this kind of knowledge. The unveilings at this level are what we call discoveries, when somebody does a scientific experiment or something and then discovers something, or discovers a principle, or discovers a certain behavior. These are what you call discoveries. These are the unveilings that come in at this level, which is the first level of intelligence. What you also call scientific breakthroughs that provide broader understandings of the logical and material and physical world. Then comes the second level, which is called active intelligence, and this is acquired when the subjective learning process, which is what is applied on the scientific level of agent intellection, that subjective learning process is transformed into objective understandings. And inshallah, we'll talk about subjectivity and objectivity in a later session. This level employs a higher degree of logic and rationality in the contemplation of the natural reality, from which one may be able to formulate intelligible views and thoughtful opinions. This is where the opinion now comes in. This is what the individual who has learned and studied and delved deep into a certain subject can now come out and say that they have an opinion of a certain thing on this. This is not just anybody have, like what is used on the street as everyone has an opinion. That's a very rudimentary and subsistent level of being opinionated. But this is the kind of opinion where you have like things like riwayat. You have somebody who is like a scholar who is of a high level, and that person says, I think this is what it means, or I think this is what it relates to. This is the intelligence that functions on sound reason, and its power is dependent on philosophical knowledge. And this is why, if you look at even the contemporary degrees of learning, where you've got your high school and then you go into your undergraduate, you get a bachelor's, and then you go into mastery. So a bachelor's is sort of an introductory. You're just getting into that science or into that field of study. And then a master's degree means that you've mastered the science or you've mastered that discipline. Then comes the PhD, which is a doctorate of philosophy, confined to that particular field of study. Now, this is not philosophy as its own discipline, philosophy, what we call falsafa. That's not what it is. This is a kind of philosophy in which you're able to formulate your own thoughts and your own opinions and your own ideas based on the knowledge that you have acquired from the level of agent intelligence. Now you are on a level of active intelligence where you're able to venture further thought and advance further understandings. The unveilings at this level, they pertain axioms and universalities that express the ontological and metaphysical natures of the outward world. So you're no longer working on the particulates or the semantics or the details. You're now taking all those particulars and universalizing them. You're bringing them all together in their essential understandings. Then comes a third level now, which is what we call spiritual intelligence. And this is acquired when the scientific rationale and the philosophical view, that is what's acquired through agent intellection and what's acquired through active intelligence, these are both then united and then subjected to the light of revelation, which is nurun ala nur, the light of revelation over the light of reason. So reason pertains those two lower levels, which is agent and active intelligence. Now comes spiritual intelligence, which now looks to revelation as the authenticator of what you have derived. This therefore transcends logic and rationality to the comprehension of a higher spiritual reality, which itself does not abide by logic and rationality. Meaning that though you will use logic and rationality in the first level, you will use logic and reason in the second level, you will also use it on this third level, but the inquiry that goes now deeper into this aspect of knowing, of acquiring knowledge, itself does not abide by logic and rationality. This is acquired through the processes of learning and acquiring knowledge, which is paired with devotional practice and religious strife. If the devotional practice and religious strife, the struggle, the mujahada fi deen, if that is not there as a component, no matter how much learning and knowledge acquisition one would do, they would not be able to unlock this level of intelligence. This is the intellect that functions on spiritual unveiling, and its power is dependent on revealed knowledge. The people who are on this level, they don't rely on scientific inquiry. They don't rely on proofs and theories, formulas. They don't rely on all these things. Their reliance is purely on revelation. It is from revelation that they then derive understandings of the physical world. Meaning that they will look at an ayah of the Quran, and then from the ayah of the Quran is where they will then derive a sort of a scientific rationale. They will not do it the other way around by looking at what the scientific world has discovered or what the prevalent theories are, and then start skimming through the Quran and looking for ayat which might fit that narrative, by which they can then say, oh, you see, yeah, they can affirm their faith now in the Quran. See, the science has discovered this today, and the Quran revealed this 1400 years ago. So see what a miracle. They don't do that kind of stupidity. This is the kind of stupidity that many of us do in our modern world and our modern age, thinking that we're very smart. And when we do this, we look at what science comes up with Big Bang theory over here and comes up with string theory over there, and then comes up with such and such study over there and another discovery over there. And then we look into the Quran and we find these ayat. We start picking up these ayat and saying, oh, look, the Quran said this 1400 years. And then the Quran said that 1400 years. See, the Quran talked about Big Bang theory on 1400 years. We start doing this. This is called stupidity. This is not at the level of spiritual intelligence. Many people get deluded in this aspect, thinking that they're actually on a spiritual path when they start making these quote-unquote discoveries of association. And remember, this is what the intellect does. It likes to associate symbols. So when it sees a similarity over here and it sees a similarity over there, مثل في مثل أو مثل على مثل أو مثل بالمثل, they immediately put in an association, even though what they're doing, the association itself is not really to blame. It's the mannerism of association. what people on this level of spiritual intelligence would do is they will look at what the ayah says and understand the ayah from what it provides as knowledge. And then they will take that knowledge and that understanding and then they will project that onto the physical world. Rather than take the knowledge that has been accumulated from the material world of science and technology and then project that onto revelation, which is the wrong epistemology. The unveilings that they then receive by doing this at this level of spiritual intelligence is that they now attain a certain spiritual insight that is able to articulate to them the unseen issuances, the amr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the alam al-amr. They are able to understand that now. They're able to understand and express the realities of this greater realm that is surrounding our physical and material realm. Then comes the fourth level of intelligence, which is what we would call prophetic intelligence. And this is an intelligence that is granted. It is bestowed upon. It is not acquired. It is bestowed upon the elite or the chosen few from mankind, chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the emissaries or advocates of His ordinance. This is an intelligence that does not acquire knowledge through sensoria, through ciencia, through philosophia. They don't venture inquiry in this sense. Prophets are individuals, and we'll talk about prophethood and prophecy in the next session, inshallah. Prophets are individuals who their knowledge is directly thrust into their hearts without any form of mediation or tuition. Mediation means that there is an intermediary between them. There is someone else in between them who is taking that knowledge and then teaching it to them. And tuition means this relatively the same thing. They are being taught that information. That's not how the prophets acquire this knowledge. This knowledge comes to them directly through intuition, by way of inspiration and revelation. It's revealed to them. There's just an opening. The veil is removed for them so that they're now able to see and understand directly without an intermediary in between. Intermediaries for us would be things like books and texts and symbols, or we'll have maybe a teacher who is going to explain those symbols and those texts and those books. That's tuition. So prophets in this case do not have to do that. They don't have to go through that process. Those are veils between us and reality, or what reality actually means. But for the prophets, those veils are removed. This is the revelation for them. The reality is revealed to them as what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deems necessary to reveal. The unveilings that is acquired at this level of intelligence is exclusive only to the prophets. And no other part of creation is privy to them, except for what they have been ordained to reveal. So whatever they have been told to deliver unto others, only that is what they will reveal. Much of that other knowledge will remain secret with them. So the prophets know things that no one has ever been able to know. And they only keep that secret because they have been instructed to keep it secret. They are the kind of unveilings that precede and supersede, I would say, time and space. They're not bound by the physicality and materiality of this world. They are pure truth in the articulation of divine ordinance. It is from these unveilings that prophecies are now revealed and from which prophetic wisdom is acquired. So they are gifted with the sight to see that which the rest of mankind is veiled from seeing. Now, of the first kind of intelligence, which is agent intellection, this is the path of the scholar. This is the path of the student who then becomes a scholar. It is the path that that involves the learning process. The second intelligence, which is active intelligence, this is the path of the philosopher. It is the path that the learning has been done, and now what has been known or acquired in knowledge is expanded into thought. There is a thought now that is exerted onto that knowledge to expand the understanding. Then the third level of intelligence, which is spiritual intelligence, this is the path of the Sufi, the true Sufi, not the fake one with the green turban and all that other stuff. the true Sufi, the one who is actually on a path of purification. Now, you have to understand here that the philosopher cannot be called a true philosopher until he has walked the path of a scholar. So anybody just rising up and saying, I studied philosophy and I did this and I have a philosophy this and all that, and I maybe read a couple of philosophy books, now thinks that they can philosophize, they're philosophers, right? Absolutely not. Until that person has walked the path of the scholar, meaning they have mastered the sciences. Without mastery of the sciences, you are going into the unknown without a foundation that is known. Whereas correct epistemology implies that you take the path of min al-ma'lum ila al-majhul. You have to start with the known, which are the sciences, and then go and venture inquiry into the unknown. So a philosopher cannot be called a true philosopher until he has walked the path of a scholar. Likewise, a Sufi cannot be called a true Sufi until he has walked the path of a scholar and a philosopher. In other words, he has mastery of the outward sciences and has understood how to venture thought and inquiry into the unknown. He knows the process. His intellect is sharpened and honed, is able to recognize the correct symbols, and is able to associate them in the proper manner. The fourth level, which is the prophetic intelligence, that path is only walked by the prophets. And this path is unique to them. Peace and blessings be upon them all. The other three individuals, the agent, the active, and the spiritual, they can only mimic this path, but they can never fully embody it, because this is the kind of path on which none can go astray. While all the other three paths, it is possible for you to go astray. So you could be on the level of agent intellection, whether you're looking at material sciences or religious sciences or both, you can go astray on those. You can be on a philosophical path and you can go astray on that. Or you can even be on the path of tasawwuf and also go astray on that. You can be misled on that, misguided on that. But the prophetic path is a straight path. No one can go astray while they are on a prophetic path. Unfortunately, only prophets can truly embody the path. The rest of us can only mimic that. So we can only do by adapting the examples that have been set by the prophets, to follow those examples and to adhere to them and to stick to them. So long as we do, we have a certainty that we are on the right path. For this reason, prophetic intelligence is not only the highest intelligence, but it is chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be the guide for the rest of mankind. The furthest that an individual can attain, the highest rank that any one common individual other than the prophets can attain, is the rank of the spiritual intelligence, which is now the rank of the awliya and the ulul albab. These are the ulul albab. It is for them whom the understandings of both the physical, the dhahiri, and the understandings of the metaphysical, which is the batini, the true understandings and meanings are unveiled to this group of individuals. Now, this is where we understand, when we looked at the hadith of Jibril, that knowledge of the signs of the hour is only accessible through prophecy. And thus, the most accurate understanding of the signs is only possible at the level of prophetic intelligence, which we have said can only be mimicked by us. So how does one who is venturing thought and inquiry, who is studying the science of eschatology, you're looking at the signs, you're trying to interpret the signs, you're trying to put pieces together, how do you attain certainty of what you're interpreting then? Well, the truth of the matter is you don't have certainty. Because the signs themselves have not fully materialized. We're talking about the major signs. They've not fully taken on a tangible form. Much of what we are venturing into that is interpretation and is also speculation. Now, the more educated an individual is in the sciences, has a firm grounding, their intellect is cultivated by the language of the Quran, which means that they're not associating symbols, left, right, and center from every direction, or making things up along the way, because the intellect will also do that. It will try to fill in the gaps. It will try to put in things that are actually not there, which when examined epistemologically are flawed or are false. This is where conspiracy theories start taking on, they start gaining momentum, because when you've got these gaps and then you start filling them in with things that don't belong there, you see, now you're going astray off the path. So you're still venturing a speculative, you're still hypothesizing. A lot of the interpretation is derived from speculation. How do you ascertain? The truth is that you don't have certainty until the tangibility of it can be affirmed. Meaning you've got a physical entity now in front of you who is Ad-Dajjal, or you've got the physical entity in front of you who is Dabatul Ard, or you've got, Al-Mahdi is right there in front of you. Now you have ascertained that what you were investigating all this time is accurate. Other than that, it is all based on the level of intelligence that you are at. So the closer you are to the prophetic intelligence, the more certainty, or the closer you will be to certainty. But you still have to go through this hierarchy. You have to start at the basic level, which is the level of agent intelligence, and master the sciences, and then go into an objective level of understanding where you're able to venture thought and inquiry and reason. And then go into the spiritual level where you can combine these two and subject them to the light of the Quran, to the light of revelation for authenticity. Then you will be able to actually mimic the prophetic intelligence, or to think, so to speak, to think as the prophets would think if they were to be studying this. If they were looking at the same information and analyzing the same data and analyzing the same symbols, how would they derive an understanding? What would they understand by it? Unless you're at that level, you will not be able to do that. This is why going through the sciences at the basic level and then increasing them in degrees of their sophistication is very important. If you skip all that and try to tackle the sign directly by yourself, it's a hit and miss. You might get it right, you might, but there's a greater probability and a greater chance that you will get it wrong. And the more wrongs you get, the further away from the right path you will stray. Alhamdulillah, this is all the time we have for today. I wish I would be able to go deeper into this, but it is a very sophisticated study and a very sophisticated science as it pertains to the nature of the intellect and how it functions. Many scholars have ventured a lot of inquiry into the nature of the intellect and have written multiple books. But this is all the time we have for today, so we're going to stop here, inshallah. Subhanaka wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Rabbana taqabbal minna innaka anta as-sami'un alim wa tub alayna ya maulana innaka anta at-tawwabur rahim bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Barakallahu fikum wa salamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.